Hi everybody, it's me, Emily, here at Tree of Life Nursery. Today we have a wonderful talk given by Colin Dunleavy. He's going to be talking about winter blooming plants and other plants of interest during this winter season and how to care and maintain them. Without further ado, I hope you enjoy.
Okay, welcome. My name's Colin. I work for a company called Liveforever Landscapes. Today we're going to cover California native plants once again, but this time we're going to focus on winter interest. And this is for coastal Southern California is predominantly where I cover. Winter in coastal Southern California is very variable. It's very dependent on rainfall that we have, and sometimes we don't see that. We have light waves of frost. The further you get up in higher elevations, you'll see more of that. These are all things you need to be very mindful of while planting and with plant selection. During the winter season is absolutely the best time to get plants in the ground, to sow wildflower seed, and there are certain aspects of maintenance that you can do in care of plants. There's certain plants that actually respond really well to getting a hard cut back or pruned out in winter. One of them being Toyon, Heteromeles or Beautifolia. Toyon is a late spring bloomer. It's going to put out small clusters of white flowers, and then after that it's going to provide a berry, which is just very beautiful. It's something that you're going to see paint our canyons, our hillsides, and anywhere you see where native plants are growing. And with that, the color provided by these plants is this gorgeous red berry, and it will hang on very well into springtime until birds come through and eat it. It's a huge habitat plant, not only for nesting birds, providing habitat, and also providing a food source. In this first photo that we see here is one of my favorite photos to show that to you, what a coastal winter garden in California can look like. A few of the plants in here is, we have Toyon as a really beautiful privacy hedge, and this you can actually see them being opened up into a small tree form. Without pruning, they like to fill out into a large shrub, small tree, but with pruning during the winter time, you can open them up and shape them out, and they provide fantastic privacy hedges. In this photo as well, there's a Rogers Red wild grape, which is a California grape, but it is a hybrid, and I do enjoy this one. Once again, you do get the red color with the native variety. It will turn into a yellow leaf, so it still provides a really nice late fall color. This also provides an edible grape, and it is really delicious. A client off of this grapevine had collected about 8 baskets of grapes, and they juiced them, and I got to try it, and it was sweet. It was perfectly fine on its own, and if you don't decide to harvest it yourself and utilize the edible grapefruit with this plant, the birds will come by and take care of it. So it's another great one for habitat. Easy to grow, does tolerate a good amount of water, but it can go fairly drought tolerant. Continuing with Toyon, this is the first photo is showing on the other side of what we just saw, and this is how it provides a really fantastic privacy screen. They do have a pool in this courtyard, and this way the neighbors outside of this property aren't able to look through. They don't see anything, and it's not done with a wall. It's not done, with anything obtrusive. It's done with a beautiful California native plant. They work fantastic. There's probably about, I want to say, 8 or 9 Toyons planted across this yard. The photo next to that, this is showing a Toyon left alone, not being pruned out into a tree form. This is great for slopes, great for shade, great for privacy screens, and when they're left alone, they're beautiful, they're evergreen. they provide tons of habitat and very easy to use in the landscape. There are several things you can do with Toyon as far as maintenance practices go. One of them is it is best to do any pruning for this plant in winter time. There's certain things that you can do as far as opening them up, as far as branches, removing branches and opening them up. You can do that throughout the year. But if you're gonna, when you have any issues with the plants, some people lose these plants to fire blight. They can become susceptible to that, and ideally what you want to do in that situation, if you think you're close to losing your plant, you can co-piece it down to the ground in winter, and most of the time, I want to say I've had them recover very well, resprout, and since the roots are already established, in about a year, they'll already be about 5-6 feet from the co-pieced root. Okay, on this next slide, another gorgeous plant that I'm surprised it isn't used much more in the landscape. This plant not only has a really beautiful flower that's great for attracting pollinators, but its leaf is one of the most fragrant leaves out of the California native plants. So you have this year-round fragrance that you can enjoy. It's great for, anybody to brush up against too, especially if you have children in your landscape. It's got a fuzzy leaf. It's fun to actually touch and hold and enjoy the fragrance. It can be used in quite different spaces. You can plant them in open spaces where you can let them get large. I've even used them in small beds and kind of train them to be more upright. But they tolerate pruning very easily. You can prune them throughout the year to kind of shape them up. But the maintenance on these are very simple as far as what needs to be done. It's just usually when they get too large, you can shape them up. Any dead material you can prune out throughout the year, and then its flowering stalks you can prune back if you want to. And this is just going to help it encourage it to continue to bloom. This is one of the earliest plants I see. It's not heavily blooming in the winter time, but it still holds a flower. And it's just when you come through on a cold winter day, and then even after rain, and you get the fragrance of this plant, you catch that, and then you see the beautiful bloom that is very contrasting to the foliage. It stands out very well. It's an excellent plant to use in the landscape. Bushrue, another early blooming plant in winter. Gorgeous on coastal slopes. It's a smaller shrub, and I typically, in certain cases, some people, it may cause dermatitis. They can be affected by this plant. So I tend to, in those situations, I tend to utilize these more on slopes and kind of out of the way. But it is a very charming plant, and it should be used. And if you can ever come across them, it's a good one to plant. They do go semi-deciduous in the summertime, but typically that's just a more of a yellowing of the leaf, and it does actually have this really interesting contrast during the summer as it goes through to probably as soon as, a lot of times with winter blooming plants, it has a lot to do with the rainfall that we see. If we do get decent rainfall, if we get rainfall earlier in the season, these will bloom earlier, but they tend to be pretty good about blooming any time of the year in winter, regardless of rain, with a little bit of irrigation. They are a very low water plant, so it's a good one to place out on slopes. The flower is a small white flower. They're in the citrus family, and it is a monotypic genus, so it's the only one you're going to find of its kind, so keep an eye out for it. Manzanita, similar to how showy our toyons are in the winter season, manzanitas are another showstopper. I'm not going to cover many different types of manzanitas because there are a lot to cover. Pretty much anywhere where you're located in California, you can find a Manzanita that grows around your area, and then that's the best idea for you, is to source something that's more local to your area. There are a lot of great cultivars as well if you're going to utilize them for different spaces, different settings like that. One of the simplest Manzanitas, if you're starting out with them and you're not too comfortable with them, is Howard Mcmahon Manzanita. This is the one we're viewing at in the photo. This is in a small bed. It's about a 3-foot bed, and throughout the year, you tend to want to wait until you get into late summer to really kind of open these up. You can open them up throughout the year, but depending on sunlight, if there's full sun in this plant and they're exposed to that, you don't want to do a heavy pruning on them. You want to slowly prune them each year, and it helps the plant to really develop better. You can shape them out. They're in the winter, especially after it rains, their bark just becomes very vibrant. The flowers, when they fall onto the ground, they look like a California snowfall. It's just a fantastic plant, and they do produce a berry after, which they're named after, being Little Apple. With Manzanitas, not only large open spaces for the larger shrub varieties, especially if you get out to like our big berry Manzanitas that you see up in the mountains, in the foothills, and then you can actually see those growing all the way out into Joshua Tree. And then we have certain coastal varieties that fall into ground cover categories, smaller shrubs. So it's a really diverse plant, and I've had good luck with them in coastal areas, from anything from pottery to small beds. In this photo, you can see it's a white cloud Veridesma in this pot right here. I took this photo about a week ago. It's already blooming. It's gorgeous. And then next to that is another early bloomer, and this one too you can see bloom kind of sporadically throughout the year. To put up a lot of flowering stalks is Hummingbird Sage. Much like a fragrant pitcher sage, it's fragrant. The leaf is fragrant, so you can have year-round fragrance. For this landscape, in the pottery, this is a seating area, so it just not only does it add a nice touch of color, great for hummingbirds, but it also provides really nice fragrance for when people are sitting around the plant. The next photo is, this is showing Manzanita used in smaller bed. This is a variety of densiflora called Harmony Manzanita. It's a little bit more low growing than Howard Mcmahon. But what I wanted to show too, this is right before the plant starts to bloom in winter, and they can vary too depending on variety. You have ones that will bloom in late fall, plants that will bloom more into winter and then into spring as well. So, you know, you can be mindful of the blooming aspect, but I kind of go with what plant's going to work best, what Manzanita is going to work best for the space that's provided. With things like this, with narrow beds, you know, you do want to go with a plant that's going to work better for it and not overgrow. The nice thing about Manzanitas is because of their slow growth, they work really well in situations like this because they're not going to overwhelm them too quickly. And then you can slowly open them up, and without the blooms, they do provide a beautiful year-round interest with that bark. So they work fantastic in formal settings. And above these this row of Manzanitas, there's some Ceanothus. That's actually snow flurry Ceanothus. That's going to put out a white flower and add some height, but also you can see though without the blooms it provides a beautiful evergreen plant throughout the year. Very easy to maintain, can be shaped up and tolerate pruning very well. So with Manzanitas, they provide a beautiful year-round structure. They are very permanent. You know, they just look nice all year round. A very important thing with Manzanitas is the care practices. If you come through and you prune these plants, let's say during the rainy season, and you open them up, the plants very easily very easily will become susceptible to pathogens through rainwater. So you have a small kind of window when you want to prune these plants in late summer to fall. And sometimes if they're in shadier areas during the summertime, you can open them up just a little bit throughout the year. It's really important to sanitize your pruning shears in between cuts. They will pick up other pathogens through unsanitized shears between other plants. And if you're dealing with something like a 10-year-old plus Manzanita in the landscape, you don't want to lose a plant to something as simple as incorrect practices. So, I even go as far on certain specimen plants. You want to actually prune your shears in between each cut on the Manzanita, and then for that you can utilize that to open them up, and then also for some of the shrubs and ground covers, you can pinch them out throughout the year so they become more dense and full. With landscaping in coastal Southern California, utilizing California native plants, we come across different microclimates. This is where you can pull plants from different regions, especially if you're trying to create a certain aspect with the plant, like in this case, using it as a hedge. This is desert lavender. It works fantastic for narrow beds, especially in microclimates along the coast that retain a lot of heat. They tolerate it really well. Very easy plant to maintain. If you let them go for a long time, they will get woody. So you want to kind of keep up with pruning on this. I mean, you can prune them out a few times a year, maybe once every 3 months, and they stay nice that way. And it's one too that really people don't really think much about its bloom, but it does put out a beautiful small clusters of lavender flowers. Typically in the winter time, and in general, this plant it has a very fragrant leaf. It is the only native lavender to California, so keep that in mind. So we do have one that belongs here and that you can use, and it should be used more. In this photo, this is directly on the coast, and it is in a narrow bed, and it really pulls this subtle contrast with the small leaf, a nice fragrance whenever you walk by it. And then when it does bloom, I do see quite a bit of hummingbirds. I do see insects gravitate towards this plant. It's just a great, well-rounded plant. Okay, moving into a really nice ground cover. It is a strawberry. We do have two varieties of native strawberries to California. One being the woodland strawberry, which is more ideal for inland sites or heavier shade to filtered sunlight, and then one being a coastal beach strawberry that can tolerate a full sun in coastal areas, and if you're going to plant it a little bit more inland, more filtered sunlight. It does provide an edible berry after it blooms. The blooms tend to pop up around winter time, and then you're going to have a strawberry. The fruit's a lot smaller, but they are tasty. I enjoy them when I'm out doing maintenance practices and things like that. I'll eat a few in the ground. A lot of times I'll leave them for whatever's around to enjoy them in the landscape, whatever wildlife is. With these plants, they can, with their runners, you can edge them out to keep them controlled. It will continue to spread by runners, by rhizome. And then over time, if you get a lot of growth out of them, you can just thin them out. So, there is some maintenance that you need with these, but overall, it's a really nice ground cover, especially in a woodland garden. It acts really nice, and it's always nice when you have something like edible plants in the landscape too, just to give you more of a connection to the landscape. Mirabilis, wishbone bush. This is a really interesting, beautiful winter bloomer for coastal California. In this project, next to the photo of the beautiful flowers of this ground cover plant, it is a low spreading one, and the colors that it provides are just gorgeous in the winter time. It will become semi-deciduous in summer, in the summer months. If you provide it a little bit more water, it will stay green. And then during those late summer months is a good time to kind of control it from spreading. You can prune it out. For this project, this was done at Dana Point Headlands. And so I had to develop a plant list that actually, used plants of that area, but also showcase what plants can be used in this very small space. And this space, you know, it was very hard to use a lot of the coastal sage-grown plants because we dealt with this microclimate of this tall building that provided shade. So, you know, I use things like the Mirabilis, Dudleas, chalk Dudleas, blue-eyed grass, California polypod, even what else? Melica imperfecta to add some grasses, a few monkey flowers, and to not overtake the spot, but to show that you can show how you can develop coastal sage-grown plants into your own landscape. These photos continue to show that. I did prepare a dry riverbed just to collect a little bit of water, but it's more aesthetic in this situation, and it's open to the public, so you can go check it out. These photos were maybe about 3 months ago, so there should be more growth at the area, and you can see the difference from when these plants were first installed to now, hopefully. And yeah, it's just to showcase how you can use coastal sage-grown plants, how you can use endemic plants to your area and bring those into your landscape. Next plant to cover are coral bells. This is a nice plant for shady areas. Really good understory plant. They are, you know, an earlier spring bloomer, but they will kind of you'll see the flowering stalks start to pop up this time of the year in winter. There's quite a different varieties of plants available depending on their bloom color, and you know, those you can just kind of research yourself depending on what you want to provide in the landscape. If you want something more in the pinkish, the whites, the reds, they are available. The plant, as far as maintenance is required, they really don't take much. So these plants, as far as pruning goes, you can deadhead them as soon as they finish with their flowering stalks when they are completed, and it actually will encourage them to possibly get another bloom again or to bloom longer throughout the season. With the plant itself, over time, you actually, the stems, the stalks can become large, and you know, when that happens, after you know, several years, you can actually cut that stem back to the ground and let it re-sprout, let it encourage it back to life. In that situation, and with, you know, with a lot of the native plants and grasses, when you do a heavy pruning like that, it's good to provide it a little bit of a low-grade fertilizer to help encourage its growth come back. But rarely anything else is needed with the coral bells. They do look fantastic in mass plantings. In the second photo, you can kind of get a sense of this. This is planted, you know, with some of our native grasses. We have Dudleas over in this property, as well as they're used as an understory in this microclimate of shade that's along the coast, but there's a wall and some larger trees. And then we have Manzanitas planted in this location too. There's Del Mar Manzanita, Big Sur Manzanita, and they just work fantastic in the shady microclimate to provide just this really delicate touch of flowers in early springtime to late winter. Ryby species. We do have several different varieties of Rybys. You're gonna have there's one evergreen variety called Rybys viburnifolium, which is a fantastic low-growing shrub. It is spreading. It is one of the only evergreen Rybys available. And then we do have the currants. The photo with the white flower is white flower currants. Those can't contain thorns. They are a deciduous shrub. They will drop their leaves in summertime. This is actually the ideal time to kind of shape them out and prune them out, because they will, you know, get up to 6 feet in some situations, but they can be they're a fantastic understory plant. They're ideal in more shady, filtered sun situations, and a very early bloomer, and you know, from winter into spring, and they do provide this beautiful pop of color. One of the from our currants, then we go to gooseberry, and this is probably the most popular one, is Ryby Speciosum. Gorgeous flower that stands out very much in the winter to springtime with this really beautiful red flower. It's another hummingbird favorite. It's actually pretty incredible to watch hummingbirds try to navigate through these flowering stalks. And it's just a really fun plant to watch hummingbirds navigate through. Just gorgeous, especially when you have, you know, darker evergreen plants throughout the landscape. It provides just this nice pop of color. Okay, coast sunflower in Cilia, Californica. Depending on rainfall, or if you're adding supplemental irrigation to your landscape, this plant will pop up pretty early in January. It's just a very vibrant yellow flower. This is one of those plants that it is one of the easiest to grow. It's a very important plant for erosion control, for slopes, for open spaces. And the reason why I say that is because it will spread. It will spread by seed, and that's why it functions really well for erosion control and slopes. With this plant, when you get to summer, they can, in areas that you're not really supplementing irrigation, that things are very dry, they will go into a semi-dormancy, and over time they'll develop and they'll become very large. They're easy to remedy that. It's easy to maintain them. They can be cut back to the ground to about, anywhere from 4 inches, and they'll resprout and recover. Typically what happens in a natural setting is they will just seed, the old plant may die over time, and they'll continue to move around where they need to be. It's an excellent pollinator plant, just a gorgeous one that you really notice a lot in our coastal sage scrub areas, down to more intermediate areas. And then you start getting into Cilia farinosa, which has a more lighter white leaf, which is better utilized in desert regions, full sun areas. Next to the coast sunflower, this is also in early January, and these ones, this is Lilac Verbena. This is one of our more Baja plants, I believe Cedros Island. And this one too, most of the time you see it bloom. It blooms, it starts out in early spring. It can hold a flower quite a bit throughout the year though, as early as winter, especially with younger plants. Same with this plant too. Any of the woody shrubby plants, you can prune them back when they finish flowering, and you're going to tend to see another bloom come out of them a lot quicker throughout the year. With Lilac Verbena too, in this photo, this was an installation done in San Clemente, where I planned it out with a dry riverbed, which is very important in winter time, is collecting the minimal amount of water that we tend to see. I mean, it varies throughout the year. Sometimes we get heavy flooding, other times we really don't see much. So what you want to do is get that water into the ground and use it. Supplemental irrigation is very important for the first year of a landscape, but the idea is over time, this dry riverbed is going to collect any of the water coming off from the roof runoff. We actually have it running into the roof runoff, into drains, into this dry riverbed to utilize everything, not just the rain coming in around it, but to collect as much as we can on site. And then in this next photo, this is the same property when it was initially installed 3 months prior, and this gives you a real idea of why we do recommend in the native plant world to plant 1-gallon plants. There's certain plants that I'll go up a little bit higher if it's going to be a structural plant, or if it's a foundation plant, especially with Manzanitas. I'll source out larger sizes if I wanted something more immediate. But in most cases, with a lot of our shrubs, they're very fast growing, and with the right care, the right planting techniques, the right watering, you'll see a very successful landscape in a matter of 3 to 6 months to a year. For this landscape too, we actually did install this one as we got into early summer as summer was approaching. And if you're gonna, if you're gonna plant in a time where you're not expecting any rainfall, you have to supplement the irrigation. Typically, with your planting techniques, it's very important how you plant a plant. It's very important to be mindful of your soil types. If you're dealing with a heavier clay versus a well-drained soil, that's going to dictate how much you water. And typically I stay around once a week if it's a medium drained soil and give it a very deep soak. And in some situations you can carry that on for about 6 months, and then you can start adding a little bit of a further interval in between watering. But it's important to irrigate for the first year until you see plants become more established. The idea with putting intervals in between how you're initially watering the plants is because you can put more water into the ground when you add a longer interval, like let's say when you get to start getting to a week and a half to every 2 weeks, to provide moisture to go further down in the soil. And that really helps the plants to follow it. If you keep an infrequent watering over at the top layer, not only plants are going to become susceptible to root rot and things like that too, but there's no reason for the roots to go deep. You're not going to have a sustainable landscape. So be really mindful with your watering practices with your plants. Yeah, so with our seasonal rainfall in California, it's ideal to try to collect what you can, and I believe the most efficient way is to put the water where you need it into the ground. And another way to do this, it doesn't necessarily have to be, something like a dry riverbed. You can do it in a very formal setting. It's the same concept, same idea. For this landscape, this is done in San Juan Capistrano, and this was I designed this about 5 years ago, and it was installed about the same time, where we used all permeable surfaces. This is actually on the top photo. We used steel edging for this landscape because we had a lot of straight lines, so it worked really well. And also, you don't have to worry about bender board pulling up. It's going to last a long time. In between the pathways that were laid down with decomposed granite, the decomposed granite, it looks like almost like a cement in this photo, but it's this really fine, almost a white sand decomposed granite with shells broken in the middle. So it also has this really nice shine to it. And this makes all the surfaces permeable in the area. And then in between those DG pathways, we did swales where we filled with riverbed rock. So when it does rain, it collects all the water. It gives a deep water to this landscape. And we needed more water, and we wanted to use less of water being piped in because we have an orchard going here. There's about 12 different varieties of stone crops in this area. We had some cherries throughout this landscape. So in this setting, being in an orchard, by planting California native plants, it's going to bring in beneficial insects. These beneficial insects are going to keep pest numbers at bay to where we're not going to have to really go in and treat anything. We can keep everything on this property organic, and everything is maintained on this property organic, which it works out better for the environment. It works out better for the kids that come out here and pick fruit. It's just one of the best ideas you can do. So in this situation, we have water being collected. We have edible fruit trees to enjoy by the humans, and we have native plants to be enjoyed by the wildlife. As this landscape developed about a few years later, this is in early springtime, as a lot of the stone crops are starting to develop their flower buds before their fruit production. And then the photo over to that shows everything leafed out, all the plants, all the native plants below that. We do have quite a bit of different varieties throughout here, more ground cover varieties. And the pathways are still very open, and you can see how much joy they get out of this landscape. And this is about 3 years after the install. Okay, and then my last area to cover with collecting rainwater. This is basically an infiltration pond. This is used in a coastal Corona del Mar, where it's mandatory that you collect all on-site water runoff and filter it through before it enters the ocean. This initially, they weren't sure what they could do with this site. I believe they had like English irises sited just to be planted throughout here in a mass planting, where we took all the ideas of fantastic California native plant landscapings with arroyo riverbeds and utilized that for this space. So not only is it going to provide a function of filtering the rainwater, but it's also going to be used correctly, and you have a really beautiful display in this bed now, where the clients actually enjoy coming back here and looking at this thing, and it became a really big prize for this landscape. Some of the plants that we used in this section were basket rush, which is a very ornamental California native plant. Grass, it can tolerate flooding very well, and then it can go into drought tolerant during the summertime. So we do have plenty of plants in California that can tolerate the seasonal flooding that can be used in these situations. A few others that we have in here is yarrow, some different lower growing grasses like carex, as well as our native stream orchid, our Epipactis giganteum, and they've all worked very well. All right, pottery. You can use a lot of our California native plants in pottery. You just have to be very mindful of the microclimate, the size of the pot, where it's located. This plant, Euphorbia Misera, Klisberg, is a very rare coastal sage grow plant, but and it does fantastic in these deep pots. This one has got to be about 4 feet in length, and it just hangs very well. With a Klisberg, you want to be mindful of your pruning on it. I wear gloves. It does have a sap that can be very irritating to people. So I wear gloves, and then you can actually do a good amount of pruning on this if you want to open it up and bonsai it in situations. But more or less, I just let it be. And it's a really pretty plant. And it works fantastic in pottery. Okay, Ramya Kulturai, Matillah hot poppy. This is definitely a spring bloomer. The only reason why I'm bringing this one up is because it's one that you want to cut back in the winter time if you have one really going and developing. After about a year or so in the ground, it helps rejuvenate it, helps it bring it back to life. You can cut it down to about 4 inches to the ground, and they just come up a lot fuller. With this plant, a lot of people want this plant. They want it in their landscapes, but be very mindful of where you're planting it. It will spread almost like a bamboo. It can become very aggressive. It's one of those plants that it's hard to get going, but once you get it going, you know, you could have it pop up, if you had like a dirt pathway, pop up like 10 feet across the road. So be mindful where you place it. But if you have space, you know, if you have a slope, if you have a decent amount of space, it's one of the most gorgeous California native plants. And in this situation, it's actually been used in a parkway. So the spaces are very controlled because they're more narrow, so we don't have to worry about it really taking off into the other parts of the landscape. And both of these photos are well into spring. And just recently, I think about maybe a month or half ago, I cut all the old stalks down, and it will produce the same way again. So Baja Veridesma, very easy to maintain, tolerates pruning throughout the year. You can really shape them up to any size you see fit. On their own, they get about 5 by 5 feet. But if you're in a situation with a narrow bed, you can prune them more upright. If you have the space, you can let them go. They do seed. They do seed over time, and it's kind of cool. Now I'm at the point on this property in San Clemente where I'm just removing a lot of the plants that come up and kind of keep them specific, but I haven't had to actually go out and buy a Baja fairy duster for this property in the last like few years. So it's a really cool plant, really great for year-round interest. The photo next to it is the same bed, and this gives you a more idea of how it kind of transitions in the spring when everything starts to show off. When you have your wildflowers start to come up, it becomes very vibrant and gives you an idea of the different and the contrast throughout the seasons. So right now we finally saw a semi-decent amount of rainfall over the past couple days, and hopefully we're going to get a little bit more in the forecast coming up. This is the ideal time to sow your wildflower seeds. So the easiest way to sow wildflowers is to wait until it rains, especially if you're in charge of your own property, if you're taking care of your own landscape. If you know rain's coming in the forecast, pick up your wildflower seeds. You can do this, well through winter, even to early spring. And use the rain and throw wildflower seeds. And in this photo, we have California poppy. This is actually used as almost a cover plant for an orchard. Once again, to bring in beneficial insects, to provide basically beneficial control through organic practices into the landscape. The smaller photo next to that, that's the beech mix from Tree of Life Nursery. Tree of Life Nursery has these really well thought out plant mixes. For example, with this beech mix, you will see things like owl's clover come up earlier in the season, tidy tips, and then it will kind of continue to progress. The poppies will start coming up well into, and then with this plant, the main plant you see in this photo is farewell to spring, and it will develop all throughout the season. So it gives you quite a show, and in most situations, we've seen quite a few reseed throughout the year, and sometimes you can replace the seed, but have fun with wildflower seeds. All right, thank you for joining me at beautiful Tree of Life Nursery, and right now, continue to enjoy the cold that we have, continue to enjoy the rain that we have, continue to plant, sow your wildflower seeds, get involved in your landscape, and my company is called Liveforever Landscape. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me and email me. Thanks again for joining.